First of all, I'd like to thank our volunteers. In particular, I want to thank the hard-working kitchen staff. Everyone working in the kitchen is an MRA or a supporter of our movement. They've been getting into the venue at 5 a.m. and not leaving until late at night to produce the delicious food we've been served. In particular, I'd like to thank Christy from Men's Rights Brisbane and A Voice for Men, who has planned and organised the food. She has been an essential member of the conference organising committee. Along with Christy, I'd like to thank Brett and Christina, who have gone above and beyond to produce the delicious food.
My name's Greg Canning. I'm a general medical practitioner from Townsville in North Queensland, and I've been an advocate for men and boys issues for some 10 or more years now. Previously I was the Australian News Director for A Voice for Men, but in recent years other commitments have stopped me from being particularly active in that role. I'm here because I would like to come to any conference that's discussing men and boys issues to try and improve my own education on the topics, to meet with other people who are working towards improving the lot of men and boys, and also I've been invited to give a presentation on the gender health gap. Greater recognition of what we refer to as the social determinants of health. What this means is that there are factors that affect health that are close in, like your biology and genetics, your health behaviours such as whether you smoke and this sort of thing, but more remotely there are societal and cultural issues. So for men, those issues are a major impact on their health. If men can't feel a worthwhile identity and role in their societies, they're not likely to look after their health. A lot of the health problems that affect men, particularly suicide for example, are directly related to issues in society where men are disadvantaged, and this includes things like what happens during relationship breakdown, separation, divorce, family court, child support, domestic violence, false accusations of domestic violence, all these sorts of issues. They're issues that deeply impact on men, their ability to feel valued by the society, and they're leading determinants of why men take their lives 4 to 5 times more often than women do. So if I could fix one thing, I would say I want the community to have more compassion and understanding for men and their problems, and to actually provide them with a little bit of help in the same way that we do for women. Regrettably, our evolutionary biology means that men tend to be more competitive with each other than helpful towards each other. But this needn't necessarily be the way, and since the advent of what the men's movement in the 60s and 70s, there have been groups of men getting together to discuss their issues. And this organisation is groups of men and women getting together to work on their issues. So I think men will, if they have the opportunity, relate to other men. They just do it differently from the way that women do it. So, for example, for myself, I'd much rather go and do an activity with other blokes, like in a workshop or building models, which is my hobby, and we chat as we go along. But I wouldn't like to just say, well, let's have a meeting with other blokes to sit down where we felt compelled to talk to each other. I think people will listen. It's the way the message is presented, and I think if you present the message from a health point of view, that these are issues that affect men's health, then most people in the community would agree that they think everyone has a right to better health. One of the tools that feminists and women's organisations often use is to have narratives interspaced with their propaganda. So when you see a human face of a woman who's been beaten and lost a child or whatever, as a story within the background, that certainly brings it home, and it's very hard not to feel compassion. So I think we need to start interspacing those sorts of men's stories, and that's what Cassie has done very effectively in her film, and it would be very hard not to feel some compassion for the stories portrayed there. Honestly, I think the momentum will continue. It's already been mentioned in one of the panel discussions that the majority of people aren't viewing the world from a gender perspective. The majority of people are husbands, wives, daughters, fathers, whatever, and they view the world from their family, their community, and that's where they want to focus their attention. So I think when I speak to average people who aren't involved in this, they will all agree that there are men's issues that need dealing with. All right, well, I guess since I'm a medical practitioner, a GP, I would like to encourage men to be more proactive in looking after their own health. In Australia, every year we have a Men's Health Week, which has been growing quite a lot over recent times. So there's some 160 or more gatherings organised around the country during next week to try and highlight the issues that are affecting men. It's true that men tend to be less proactive in managing their own health, and there are good reasons why this might be. So I would just say, get in there and do it. One of the things I often tell my patients is, consider yourself a bit like a machine that you own, your car or whatever. You're going to look after that, you're going to stick to the regular maintenance intervals, you're going to change the filters and do this when they need to be done. Treat yourself the same way, you're going to get better mileage and still be going strong longer. A couple of the best resources that I know of for men and men's issues are the 1 in 3 website, which is a campaign led by health professionals throughout Australia to raise the awareness that there are male victims of domestic violence. It has a lot of factual data and references. The other thing that I would really suggest is worth a view is the New Male Studies Journal. If you just search New Male Studies in Google, you'll come up with a journal where males' issues are being looked at from a male's perspective without having to comply with feminist dogma, and some of the articles you'll find in there are just absolutely outstanding. Sometimes we will be in a space where we feel that life is not worth living, and mostly that's a temporary thing. So if you get to that low level in your life, there are people out there to assist. If you don't have a friend or someone you can call, certainly in Australia there are services such as Lifeline. Just pick up the phone, someone will talk to you. It can generally be sorted out.
Oh, well, she's very insightful. She's been talking about these types of issues for decades. She's got a lot of credibility. And what she says is very insightful and very well thought out. And when she first started out, I was a teenage boy and she was talking about sex, so she had my attention straight away. But I think she touched on it briefly. She's a mother of sons, and she's concerned about mothers of sons not speaking up. And I see this, it gets me too. Every year the high school certificate results come out, the girls are just trouncing the boys, and the mothers are silent. And they have to start stepping up for their boys and for their daughters too, because the daughters will suffer as well. But they have to start stepping up, and that's my. And she brushed across that, but I think that's a big motivation for her. She's got 2 boys and a daughter, and I think that she cares about that.
Well, I'm Mark Latham. I'm from Mark Latham's Outsiders and Rebel Australia. I've had a long-standing interest in men's issues, first as a member of the House of Representatives in the Australian Parliament, and now as a media commentator, locking horns with left feminists as often as I can and pushing back against the absurdity of their arguments. So I'm very happy to be at this conference, which is a wonderful voice for men. Well, it's about the myths of white male privilege, which is a ridiculous notion. I'm going to talk about where this absurdity has come from, why the left feminists have taken the stance that they have, and I'm going to hopefully provide a bit of optimism for the men's movement, because I think some of the men's groups are feeling a bit isolated and maybe they're not making enough progress. But I think ultimately our side of the argument will prevail because it's got reason, rationality and the truth behind it, and that's always the powerful force in politics that prevails. So I'm hoping to be a bit upbeat and optimistic about where this is all headed. I think in politics we've got a lot of PC, a lot of sort of mild talk, politicians who aren't prepared to confront basic truths, and political correctness means that they're reluctant to speak the truth if it offends anyone. And undoubtedly in the 60s and 70s there was discrimination against women, and we needed to be a fairer, more equal society. I think the gains of the women's movement through the 80s and 90s were phenomenal, and I now regard us as a fair and equal society without any active discrimination against women. But within the political class, within the political elite, still the argument, the orthodoxy is that women are hard done by, and your average politician trying to get the woman's vote and not wanting to offend anyone goes along with that orthodoxy. So they're weak, they're politically correct, they're not willing to stand up for basic truths in society, and that's why the political class has caved in on these issues. But as we saw most dramatically in the United States, if you ignore the needs of men, they go out and express their resentment at the ballot box, and that's why Donald Trump's the President of the United States today instead of Hillary Clinton. So I think that's a great demonstration of how politicians who get it wrong and have got the wrong emphasis and they build resentment among certain groups, they pay the price, and I'm sure something similar will happen in Australia. I think it has slowed. I think Trump and the US election result was very important because it showed that it's insufficient for a person to campaign and say vote for me solely because I'm a woman. That's what Hillary Clinton tried to do, and that was a stunning defeat. Men who'd been economically knocked around, who hadn't been the focus of the Democrat campaign, in fact Clinton called them deplorables. Well, naturally they hated that, and they went out and voted in vast numbers, quietly, methodically, democratically, and they voted for Trump. So I think the election of Trump was a demonstration that any politician who thinks that campaigning solely as a woman or solely on female issues is going to win you the popular vote and elect you into office is just plain wrong. Trump won a majority of votes in a majority of states, and he's the president. So I think all of that slowed the momentum. But it's also true that in practice, what can the feminists campaign on? I mean, they've made such wonderful advances. I very much support the rise of female participation rates in universities, which 60% of women in Australia are 60% of graduates in Australia are female. You look at the welfare dependency rates, male suicide rates. These are all a lot worse than the status of women in Australian society. So the women who made all these agreements and now, all these achievements, all this progress, are very much left with trivia. And we had International Women's Day in March, where in Australia the focus was on two things. The ABC had female presenters only. Well, what a piece of trivia, as if that matters. And the other focus was a campaign in Melbourne, Victoria, to change the little stick figure inside the pedestrian light so it looked like a woman instead of a man. Whoever noticed that? I mean, you're just worried about whether it's green or red. Nobody's really sort of, perving on the stick figure to see what it looks like. So these things are just laughable. They're just open to ridicule. It's trivia. So I think their movement has slowed because they've been bogged down in trivia and they've gotten really nothing substantial to say. So I'm not surprised that the pendulum has slowed, and it really should come to a halt. Well, I think we've got to stop the demonisation of men. In the left-wing media and left-wing politics, there's this demonisation of so-called white male privilege, which is ridiculous. A lot of white men are down on their luck. They're facing all sorts of challenges and problems economically and socially, and the demonisation of men must stop. And there must be a recognition of reality that women in Australia have achieved equality in a whole range of areas. All they're left with is trivia. So we've got to recognise that. And the other thing is to be more realistic about the domestic violence debate. In Australia, domestic violence has been used as a Trojan horse, not because these people are serious about solving the problem, but they're using it to try and demonise men and say that all Australian men are potential wife bashers. That's ridiculous. The problem is driven by alcohol, drugs, Aboriginality, poverty, socio-economic disadvantage. You look at the statistics for every domestic incident in a middle-class suburb, there are 10 in a public housing estate, 25 in a remote Indigenous community. So we've really got to focus on reality there to address that issue properly, instead of the fantasy of patriarchy and what the left feminists do in the demonisation of men. Yeah, the people aren't one-dimensional. There's no man who lives his life solely through gender. There's no woman who lives her life solely through gender. Everyone's got a whole range of issues in their lives, and a lot of women resent the left feminist push mainly because they're mothers of boys. And if you've got teenage boys these days with issues in the education system and worried will they get a fair go, will they be treated on their merit, they seek a job in the Australian public service, then naturally those women are worried about the future of their sons. I mean, the high profile one is Miranda Devine, who's motivated by a concern about the future of her sons in a society where boys like that, no matter how hard they work and how hard they study and how good they are, there's this element of demonisation solely on the basis of gender. So the average woman I speak to in Australia, women away from the 2% left feminist elites, they often say that in the workplace they haven't experienced discrimination because they're a woman. They'll often say that in fact perhaps being a woman's been an advantage in the workplace, and if they do receive negativity in the workplace, it's normally from other women, not men. So they look at the left feminist stuff as ridiculous, but we've also got to appreciate that the left feminist stuff is really about the top 2% of society. The argument is boiled down to an argument to say that we want more female politicians, we want more female judges, we want more female corporate board members. So this is right at the top level of privilege and opportunity in society, the top 2%. The other 98% of society is very fair, and in fact you'd say the disadvantage is loaded against men in a lot of the key indicators. So left feminism is essentially a very selfish doctrine. It's just about them, the top 2%, a Dee Madigan, a Julia Baird, an Ann Summers, Jacqueline Maley. The women who've done really well, they come from these privileged families and they're interested in what they can achieve at the elite top 2% level of society. So it's an incredibly selfish doctrine and argument. And the other 98% of women understand that and know that by and large in the workplace and in society and the opportunities we've got in an affluent, good country like ours, that society is miles better than it was 20, 30 or 40 years ago. So we're only dealing with the 2% of the political elites. Their arguments are wrong and ultimately it'll fall over. Well, I'm Mark Latham from Mark Latham's Outsiders and Rebel Australia. To access my platform, go to my website, marklathamsoutsiders.com. That's marklathamsoutsiders.com. Enter your name and email address and you'll be part of our effort to fight back against leftist elites and reclaim our country for good traditional Australian values and institutions. Thanks for listening.
Specifically, we're here in support of Cassie's movie and really the impedance of progress that is represented when she goes to show it and she's blocked. Same with Milo Yiannopoulos and other speakers. You don't have to agree with what they're saying.
So you're a free speech advocate?
Absolutely. But more than that, sometimes you can recognize, as we did with radical Christianity, radical Islam, we see the same thing happening with radical feminism, where they're absolutely intolerant to any opposition, any discussion, any rational thought in the Western world. That's a big problem in the Western world. We have to have free speech, we have to have discussion, we have to have negotiation between pluralism, a society where different people are allowed to exist. And the same people who pretend to be the advocates of this are now the enemies of it. And that's a big change in our society. We consider that to be a very ominous change in society, because if the liberals aren't speaking for freedom, the party that calls themselves the liberal people are not speaking for freedom and discussion and rationale, who's going to do it? The traditionalists are not traditionally defending pluralism. They like to have a very single-minded way of life. Now we're finding that the traditionalists are becoming the open-minded ones, and they want to hear multi-faceted arguments. But at the same time, that doesn't seem like a positive change, because now we have two radical elements of society at war with each other, which leaves anyone who isn't a member of either radical notion without a country, really, without any territory to be free and intellectually progressive, I guess.
Hi, my name is Deepika Narayan Bhardwaj. I am a documentary filmmaker from India. I am at ICMI 2017 to showcase my documentary, Martyrs of Marriage, which is based on misuse of the anti-dowry and the domestic violence law in India, and how men and their families are suffering because of the extreme amount of abuse of this provision. We had the screening yesterday evening, and the response from the audience here at ICMI was phenomenal. I have been getting a lot of standing ovations for this documentary, but at ICMI, I got a standing ovation twice. So I think that people really loved the documentary here. It moved them. It told them a story that they don't often hear from India. And it's been just a brilliant platform, and it was not just about presenting the documentary, but telling people the issues that men are facing in India, and the response was tremendous. A lot of people have extended support, and they want to take this issue to universities abroad and a lot of other platforms which can actually impact a bit of change in India from international forums. So been lucky to be here at AVFM's conference, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. So my journey of Martyrs of Marriage started in 2012 when, because of a very close experience, something that happened in the family, I landed up in the Indian courts and police stations on accusations that were absolutely untrue. And when I inquired on how something like this can happen, I was told by not only just advocates but also judges and everybody around that the laws are extremely skewed. It is very easy to file a dowry case or a domestic violence case on a man and his family in India, and no matter how many evidences you have, no matter how many absolute facts of the case you have with you, and no matter how easily you can prove that these are false accusations, you still have to go through the ordeal of facing a criminal trial which does not have any cap on it. You would be facing the criminal charges for 4 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And even if you prove that the charges were untrue, were absolutely false, the system doesn't really provide any recourse. It was absolutely shocking to me. It was absolutely bizarre. And as a woman, there was a question in my mind that if a woman who is alleging such things is a woman and she has the protection under the law, then what about me? Or what about my family members? What about my brother? What about my father? They are also citizens of this country and they need protection as much as the other person. So how can the law differentiate so much? So that was the starting point when I started researching and knowing more about this issue. And like you would have seen in the documentary, the first case of Makhdoom, Syed Ahmed Makhdoom from India, when I saw his suicide video, which he left because of this harassment, I decided that I'm going to tell this story to the world. And like I shared yesterday, it's been a long journey. It took me 4 years to make this documentary. I made a commitment to myself that no matter what, I'm going to tell the story to the world and tell people that something like this is also happening, because one biggest reason of people becoming extremely helpless and taking their own lives is because they think that they are only one who's going through this. But that's not true. There are just thousands and lakhs of families in India who have gone through this, who have faced this issue. So people who are going through it right now are not alone. So I wanted to tell them that it's not just happening with you, it's happening with so many people, and that we need to get together to do something about it. So it was a commitment, and I'm glad that I was able to make this documentary. As far as protests against my documentary is concerned, I haven't really seen a kind of a pushback that the Red Pill has seen. And I think a major reason for that is that the MRAs in the West have extreme opposition from the feminists. We do also have a lot of opposition by feminists in India back there, but not visibly in the form of street protests or yankering or violent attacks or something like that. I think they just play their cards in the parliament in making the laws, and just choking the voice that is being raised for men's issues through the side of law, because they're just so powerful inside the courts, inside the parliament, that I don't really think they need to do something outside. So coming back, I haven't really faced too many protests against Martyrs of Marriage per se, and one of the reasons for that also is that as unlike the Red Pill, which basically focuses more on the men's rights movement, this documentary focuses on the misuse of a particular law, which even the feminists and women organizations have been victims of. So there are a lot of people inside the feminist movement in India who have faced the abuse of this law. So I think there is a very huge understanding of this issue, not just limited to the men's rights activists or people working in this space, but also as a whole, even the lawmakers. So they also know that this law is grossly abused. But I think the documentary is essentially a step towards getting the law changed and getting the situation better. I think if we analyze the change that has happened as far as justice to men is concerned, or, are we moving towards an egalitarian society? I don't think we are yet there, but yes, we have definitely made inroads in my own personal experience because, and thanks to the leaders of the men's rights movement, not around the world and in India, and in India particularly, I think the men's rights activists have done a phenomenal job in terms of protests, in terms of lobbying with the government, in terms of telling people how biased our laws are, and also inspiring others to actually work on these issues. I got a great deal of support from the Save Indian Family movement to make Martyrs of Marriage, and I was basically inspired by how many people are working on this issue. So I think situations definitely, if I talk about India, have improved a bit. We are seeing some of the changes in terms of judgments in our Indian courts as well, where people are now, some of the judges are now sort of not afraid to give absolutely neutral and absolutely and judgments which are basically justice oriented rather than gender oriented. But I think that's still a minority. But I think that's where documentaries like The Red Pill and Martyrs of Marriage come in picture. They give you a very human side of the issue. So Martyrs of Marriage is also now screening at the judicial academies in India. So these are places where magistrates, police officers go for trainings, and they're seeing this documentary, understanding that how important it is to draw a balance and not just completely go one-sided. So I'm hopeful. I think we are moving ahead. I think we should be positive. Yes, it's a very, very difficult journey. And like I shared with Cassie, sometimes you feel hopeless, whether it's going to bring a change or not. But just the fact that people are rising up, people are talking about it, people are ready to understand this, I think is somewhere a positive note, that all is not that bad. Yes, it is bad, but I think it's an effort that a lot of people around the world will have to come together to basically address. If I were given a magic wand, then at present, my biggest want, or if I could just change things like this, would be a similar punishment to people who file false cases, to women who are abusing these laws. As much as a man would get punished if he had actually done something like that on conviction, I think a woman who files these false cases should be equally punished. If I were to change something in Indian laws, I would just bring a law immediately which calls for prosecution of false accusers. And there's just no two way about it, because I remember in one of my screenings, a person from India said that two wrongs can never make a right. It just cannot never make a right. If you wish to set things right, this is not the way. Allowing people to abuse laws, allowing people to destroy lives, it is just not the way. So if I had a magic wand back in India, and I think across the world, I think false accusations should be dealt with very strictly, because not only is it an injustice to a human being, but it completely shatters a life. And I think, like we say, men's rights are human rights right here on the podium. It's a human rights violation. You can't play with lives like that. Hi, my name is Deepika Narayan Bhardwaj. I'm a documentary filmmaker from India. My documentary Martyrs of Marriage was yesterday shown at ICMI 2017. It's a documentary on how dowry laws and the domestic violence laws in India are abused, and how our laws are extremely one-sided. Our Domestic Violence Act is not gender neutral. So the documentary focuses on suicides by men because of these issues, how our laws are extremely biased. It's a very important piece of work as far as issues that men are facing in India is concerned. So my request to everyone out there is to take this documentary out to as many audiences as possible. Work along with me, support me. My website is www.martyrsofmarriage.com. We are on Facebook and Twitter. You can reach out to me at Deepika Bhardwaj on Twitter, at Deepika Narayan Bhardwaj on Facebook. I'm really looking forward to people from across the world to look at what's happening in India, the story that's not really told, and looking forward to support from across the board. And please help me in taking this documentary to as many audiences as possible. Thanks, AVFM.
And the reason I'm here is, frankly, as a gender atypical male, I thought that the feminists would be my ally and be my friend. I had a rude awakening which nearly got me doxxed and subjected me to an online hate campaign. You know, one of the things that they like to fake against themselves, but are very good at waging against others. That, to borrow a metaphor, was my red pill moment, and ever since then, I've realized that the only hope for men who do not, how do we put it, measure up to the ideal which goes by the nickname of Chad, the only hope for men like me, and men like in my situation, is the men's rights movement. It is not feminism. They hate us even more than they hate Chad.
Look, I've been a fan of Bettina since I was a teenager as well, and I think she's...
So have you made the change with her then? Have you?
No, I was never a feminist,
right.
But I grew up knowing that I had equality. I mean, I'm 52 years of age, and I was raised in an era when I knew going into the workforce that I had full equality with anybody. There was nobody ever going to stop me. And I mean, in relation to her talk, I just think that Tina's long-standing passion, it does never die. I'm sure, like all of us, she runs out of energy and then she regroups and she comes back, and she's morphed and changed over time. But she really has been a trailblazer for people like myself to be able to speak up and to feel confident about, coming into the men's movement and to speaking up on men's issues. And I think we need more of her. Yeah.
So in everyday life, amongst your girlfriends and your female friends, would you say they're much like the way you think, or whether they're all
No, they're not. And in fact, the Sex Diaries was, Bettina's book, The Sex Diaries, was quite a bone of contention amongst some of my girlfriends at the time, who were all feminists and who were passing the Sex Diaries around their book club. And then one of them came to me and kind of slapped it on the kitchen table and said, "I think this was written for you." And I said, "I've been telling you." And I said, "I can't believe that you're not taking away from that what it's meant for." And they were ardent that it was just anti-women. And I'm like, that's not the way I read it. So, maybe take the filters off.
So do you find amongst your group of friends sometimes you have to bite your tongue or hold back in case someone gets offended?
I've certainly, some of my closer friends who are who still identify as feminists, I can have virulent debates with them, and have done in the past. But slowly but surely, the really radical feminists will drop off, and that's fine. If they're going to judge me for having a difference of opinion to them, then so be it.
I'm here because my husband is an MRA. I'm a lawyer in California. I've attended the Berkeley riot. I found it was disgusting to see the fact that free speech now is no longer valued by certain people in our society. And I think we need to reclaim the left. And that's why I'm here. I'm more into action. I'm more into the police coming out. Like, I'm an alumni of UC Berkeley. I was very disappointed to see the police didn't come out and stop the violence. So I'm more interested in, if this sort of thing happens again with the Antifa people coming out and trying to squelch free speech, I'm more interested in seeing the police come out and support, even the man I saw wearing the red Trump hat. I did not vote for Trump, but I respect his right to be there and attend the gathering, and he was being peaceful, and I think he should be protected too. The same as I should be protected if I attended a Bernie Sanders rally, for instance. I'm worried about the left. I think that we need a brand new candidate, not Hillary. I hope she isn't coming back. We need a brand new candidate who is going to embrace the classical liberal positions that I grew up with. Where did they go? Where can we find this person? So I'm an American, and that's what I'm interested in.
We're here to have a look at what's actually going on in the men's issues sphere. We've got a lot of interest in things like child support and family court issues, so we thought it'd be interesting to listen to people like Mark Andalucci and Augusto Zimmerman and also Ken Aronson to find out what's going on.
So are you here in an official capacity?
No.
Or just personal
interest?
Groups.
We're just part of a group, but Matt here does a lot of research in his spare time,
okay.
So yeah, we just come for the education.
Okay, now we're at a men's conference. It's your turn, sir.
Thanks, Tom. One of the things that Joe alluded to is that we're part of a community organisation. It's only run through Facebook. It's a very unofficial group, but we provide support and assistance to people in the child support system. Men, women, parents, grandparents, step-parents, the whole range, just to try and help people navigate their way through a system that is groaning under the weight of various agendas, and people are struggling. So, and you can't really access legal assistance because who's going to pay $5,000 to help recoup $3,000 in child support or something like that? So we're here to try and meet a few people that we've touched base with online and build those connections to try and go forward to help more people.
Okay, excellent.
And if anybody is interested in finding out more about the child support available, there's a Facebook group, Child Support Australia, Time for Reform and Fairness, or use the hashtag #ReformCS.
My name's Trevor. I'm here because I've been interested in men's stuff for for 20 years, and I live locally. I live in Brisbane. Realised this was here, and I thought it's a real opportunity to tap into. No, I'm not part of men's rights. We had a service in Brisbane 25 years ago called Men's Helpline, where guys could telephone in, and from there we became aware of lots of. We had our own men's issues. We became aware of many other, and I've followed on. I've stayed with it ever since.
My name is Robert. I'm a partner of Trevor. Why am I here? I'm here to gain information. I'm not a member of the men's rights campaign or anything like that, but I have been involved in something called men's well-being or men's health and well-being for over 20 years. And I'm really attracted to another campaign called the Say Yes campaign. And the Say Yes campaign is say yes to domestic peace. Rather than focusing on the negatives, I'm thinking about the ways we can actually promote discourse between men and women, and also ways of enhancing and enriching our lives.
Well, I'm here with Robert Brockway. We've just had a sensational conference, I think it's fair to say. Robert, would you like to say a few words?
Well, I'd just like to say yes. I think the conference was a great success, and I really want to thank you, Mike, for your help during the conference. You've come all the way from the UK and done a fantastic job, and the experience you gave us from ICMI17 was invaluable.
Yeah, I mean, very friendly audience, very engaged, I think, with materials on the internet and elsewhere. And I'm, one of the things I called for, don't know if it'll happen, is for the establishment of an Australian men's rights party, because the electoral system here would suit that.
It's very interesting you should mention that, actually. Yes, I thought that was great that you'd mentioned that in your talk, and we have certainly talked about that over the last couple of years. It's interesting, though, that I did an interview with a reporter not long after, and he asked me about my political aspirations.
Right. And those are?
I offered him no comment.
But for anyone who doesn't know, the Australian electoral system has proportional representation, compulsory voting, and transferable vote. And I guessed in my speech that because you have to vote, that many people must spoil their ballot paper, and there was a sort of laugh went around the room at that.
It is true that we probably would have a higher rate of spoilage than you would in the UK by virtue of the fact that our system is compulsory. We do have, though, around about 95% participation rate, so around about 95% of people actually turn up to vote. Also, one of the interesting things about our system that you were really touching on is that it advantages small parties, because somebody can make a vote for a small party, and if that party doesn't get elected, then that vote will flow through to another party. So in a sense, the vote isn't wasted. In a system with a first past the post, people tend not to vote for small parties because they perceive it as a wasted vote. Our system prevents that.
So I guess we can probably wrap it up then, Robert, can we? Yeah, been three busy but very exciting days, and we look forward to the next conference, wherever that might be. Some speculation around that. Canada, India, Iceland, Nepal, who knows?
Well, they all sound like great places to go.